Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode, and I'm absolutely thrilled today to have with me Jennifer Gardner. Jennifer, first of all, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Nice to be here.
Jennifer, you have a really interesting professional career as well as a legal career. I'm really going to focus on the non legal part of your professional career, but as a lawyer, I know you can't separate the two. So I wanted to start by asking you, can you tell us about your professional background as a lawyer, but moving into your career around leadership?
Absolutely. I started my own practice with very little experience in 1992, like January of 1992. And the cards were really stacked against me. But that began a journey of entrepreneurship in addition to becoming a better trial lawyer. I had no trial experience when I started my practice, but I loved running a practice. I loved helping people. And even though I've had a lot of curiosity about other businesses and other endeavors that people do with their working productive lives, I've stayed being a lawyer because by having my own firm, I was able to be flexible with my time and I could pursue other interests that interested me. So that's a really good segue to what led me to want to discover leadership and influence. It really started with influence. And then I backed into, oh, when you're influential, that's actually a leadership skill because lawyers are not taught that what they're doing is actually leading. We're really taught to be advocates and to argue, not to persuade or to influence. But that's what we're doing all the time. Or, as I like to say, that's the opportunity that we have all the time is to influence and persuade.
And one of the reasons I was so excited to visit with you on this podcast is my audience is largely a corporate compliance audience. And that is the primary skill they need, or if they're successful, they have. And I say that because in the corporate compliance world, you're not a general counsel. You can't say, don't do that because you'll violate the law. All you have is your ability to influence and persuade. So I really wanted to pick your brain and get your thoughts about that topic, how lawyers, how compliance professionals, how those in the corporate world can use your ideas around influence leading to leadership. And I wanted to start with maybe, is there an experience or two that helped shape this perspective? Or is it just has your thinking evolved starting from when you've opened your own law practice?
Well, I have to kind of go back in time to when I opened my own law practice. I had no savings account, no trust fund, nobody really supporting me in that practice. And I had to get scrappy to get business. There was no internet. It was all word of mouth referrals. And so I did a lot of face to face meeting with people that I knew and then people that they were referring me to in order to hopefully get business. And what I ended up getting was all the cases no sane lawyer would take, right? Like all the difficult clients with unreasonable positions, and they all wanted a trial. Come hell or high water, they wanted a trial. Like it was almost impossible to settle a case. So I ended up taking their matters to trial. And I realized in the very beginning, and I was terrified in the very beginning, especially, I'm still afraid, but I'm all, but at least now I have some experience and some training and some real expertise and skills to rely on. But in those days, I had zero. And I realized I have no idea how to try a case. And what happened though was to my surprise and the surprise of my colleagues and people who were probably betting against me the entire time, I won case after case. And we're talking unanimous jury verdicts in crazy fraud cases where when the case was over, for example, other lawyers in the courtroom and clients on the other side, the opposing parties would come up to me and say, wow, and I got it. I'm doing something right. But I had no idea what it was I was doing. And it turns out that what I was doing was I was telling compelling stories. I was really focused and coming from the right side of my brain, not the left side of my brain, because I wasn't a legal genius. I didn't understand the rules of evidence or the code of civil procedure. And I really just went in there and did the only thing that I knew instinctively how to do, which was tell a compelling story about the psychological dynamics of the humans involved in this dispute. And I started to get it after a while. That was my superpower, but I still had no idea what that was. And after 20 years of winging it, I like to say, I decided it was time to get some advanced trial skills experience. And so I did. And I went to the Trial Lawyers College, which at that time was run by Jerry Spence. And I realized that what I was doing was something that other practitioners, primarily in the plaintiff's personal injury and criminal defense space, were doing the same thing that I was doing in business, in the business context, because my disputes were all business, real estate, and entertainment business focused at the time. They still are. I'm in Los Angeles, so I get a lot of people who have entertainment industry or their hands in entertainment industry enterprises or experience. So in any event, that is what started me on my journey to go even deeper into what this was. I came out of the Trial Lawyers College, graduated, did a graduate program, and then I realized, you know what, there's so much more to this than meets the eye. I have to go deeper because it's fun, it's interesting, it lights me up. And so that just led me on my path to studying more and more about what is influence, what is persuasion, and how is that happening in the human brain.
Let's just go there. What is happening in the human brain?
Yeah. What's happening in the human brain is when you have a person who is incredibly charismatic and magnetic, they're resonating on an emotional level with the person or the people that they're speaking to on a very deep emotional level, which means they have an understanding of how to craft a message that's going to appeal to the listener. And they have an instinctive understanding of this message. They may have their own personal reasons for wanting to advance their message, but they know instinctively or because they've been trained in this, because you can learn this in some of the best business schools in the country. They teach this now, but they understand that the message is always about the listener. The key is you got to think about who you're trying to influence. Are you leading up? Are you leading sideways? Are you leading down? Who are you motivating? Who are you trying to get to agree with you? And it all starts with that. And that requires a lot of emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is a phenomenon that's occurring primarily in the right side of our brains. So they are super right brain communicators.
Jennifer, I certainly understand targeting your message for your audience, and I certainly understand connecting on an emotional level. But how do you take that concept and apply it to 12 citizens sitting in a box who come from as disparate backgrounds as there are in any community?
Okay. That starts with jury selection, which is what's called in the legal profession voir dire. And that's your very first opportunity to build a relationship with each and every juror, one word at a time, one word and one breath at a time. And you do that by being yourself, by being these words we hear about it about all the time, right? Authentic and vulnerable. Yes. You don't want to come off as too much of a know it all. And you want to have your language be in plain English so that these people from the community can understand and resonate and deeply connect with what it is you're trying to say. And not just what you're trying to say, but what you want to do is use this opportunity to tap into the emotional content of the case.
Now, how does that translate to the corporate world where you may have senior executives, obviously different genders, different races, different cultural backgrounds? Is it that same process you've just outlined? Understand your audience and present your story, if I can use that word, or communication to that audience that will resonate with them on almost an emotional level?
Absolutely 100%. But you don't want to just bring the emotion, especially in that context. You want to bring a combination of what they call system one and system two thinking. You want to bring the data and you want to bring the compelling, plain English reason why this matters to whoever it is, whether it's the customer of the company, the shareholders of the company, the teams that are affected by whatever decision making is happening in the C suite of the company, for example, the investors. You got to have a combination of both to have authority and credibility.
What if I'm a recovering trial lawyer So I have a few of those under my belt. And one of the most powerful arguments I unfortunately saw literally right in front of me, because it was a plaintiff's lawyer, was where my truck ran a red light and hit his car. And
Mm.
he didn't say it like that. It was completely graphic. And every time he had the opportunity, he would use slam or ram or run into, and it resonated with me. But how do you take that same concept of telling that kind of story in a fraud case or a business case where there's data and the jury really wants to see or at least hear the data to back up your claim?
You have to have both, like I said. But I like to tell a story about what the data shows and interpret that data in very basic humanistic terms. Like once I was helping some colleagues prepare for a DUI case, and the entire case, the trial was going to come down to the credibility of an expert. And that was what we focused on, is that whether or not the test that the expert used was an adequate test that led to a competent conclusion. And what we came up with in super plain English to distill down a very complex scientific concept was you got to test the test. And in this case, they didn't test the test to verify for accuracy, that the test results were accurate, right? So that was how we discredited the expert's opinion. For example, so something very simple like ram or slam or test the test. Simple really is best. And I've applied these ideas. I only try business and real estate dispute cases. And I've had cases with super inflammatory facts, like cases involving incest and the transfer of deeds or the failure to transfer interests in property, right? Where I still was able to get a trial court and a court of appeal, despite the salacious facts, to agree with my client who was the alleged wrongdoer, right? So the way I was able to do that was to humanize him, of course, but it was also by being able to articulate these emotional dynamics. And I don't care if you're a Fortune 500 company or a mom and pop LLC, right? The bottom line is your enterprise is comprised of humans. And so every human has a story and a part to play in whatever the courtroom drama is, whatever the dispute is. And that really is my passion, is getting into the psychographics of not just the people on a demographic basis, but really on a personal basis. Who are they? What's motivating them? What do they want? What are they afraid of? And it works.
Let me take this in a little bit different direction because the trial lawyer in me is about to take over my entire personality.
Are you going to cross examine me now, Tom?
No, but I thought this podcast was gonna be about corporate compliance officers, but I'm thinking, no, it's gonna be about me and a recovering trial lawyer. No, what I wanted to ask is there's a really, in my mind, 2 parts to being a lawyer. You have described greatly the storyteller part, but there's also a technical competence part. There are some bare minimums of technicalities that you need to know, and I don't mean really the laws, but it's the procedure and how to go through the process, both pre-trial and trial. So could you say a few words about wedding those 2 skills, one a more technical and then one more of the neuroscience of your storytelling that you've been telling us about?
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you asked me that because this is a relatively new area of geeky research that I'm doing. Like, I'm one of these crazy people who actually goes into Google Scholar and I don't just read the summaries, I pay for the PDFs. So, one of the things that I am really interested in is what they call interbrain synchrony. And it turns out that the right side of our brains is the most powerful part of our brain, especially when it comes to decision making. People will make decisions based on emotion. And the whole key is while you have to have the linear informational stuff like the data, right? And the procedure and the rules, right? In order to get them to decide for you, and I don't care if this is a corporate compliance context or a corporate negotiation or some political corporate maneuvering or a lawsuit and a dispute, it applies regardless. And I say that based on my experience in Ivy League institutions where when they teach these ideas, they give you the concepts and then they have you break out into groups and role play. And these are advanced business management, executive presence, leadership skill, influence programs, right? So the bottom line is that with the inner brain synchrony, you want to be communicating, even when you're talking about a law, you want to be able to articulate it as basically and as understandably as possible. And if you can really concentrate on imbuing your communication with the emotion or the passion that you feel about your cause, and focus on the right side of your brain, which is forming an emotional connection, even as you are explaining these technical facts, your interlocutor, which is what the audience is or the person you're communicating with, is going to relate to you, studies, functional MRI and imaging studies show, with the right side of their brains. So that's the goal. Right brain to right brain communication. If you want to connect and if you want to form the bond and if you want to make it even easier for whoever you're trying to influence to agree with you.
When I moved from the private practice trial lawyer world into the corporate world, I started doing contracts. And it was clear to me one of the very basic differences I had from my colleagues who had started in house was I saw a very different ultimate audience. I saw it, being a trial lawyer, as the trier of fact, whether that be a judge, whether that be an arbitrator, or whether that be a jury of 6 or 12 people. And I've heard you describe the jury. I've heard you describe the trial judge. I've also heard you mention the court of appeals, so that there are potentially multiple audiences you may be speaking to. How do you graft a story that will resonate with each one? Or do I have it wrong? And perhaps you're going to have a different story for each individual or group of listeners.
Yes and no. I think that we can't forget the fact that judges and justices are human beings, right? They're human beings they have to follow the law and they have to apply the law, but they're also humans. And when you have close calls in how to interpret a law, I think that the human emotional factor is what's been for me in my career, my 37-year career, the tipping point, right? Being able to tip the scales because I can push the buttons and hit the emotional places in people's brains and hearts. I think that to tell a compelling story, and I know we story is so overused, like authentic and vulnerable, but this is really what it comes down to. What's universal in our human experience that we can all relate to? What is the law anyway, especially the civil law? It's a way of resolving disputes peacefully between human beings that have come up for hundreds, maybe thousands of years as humans trying to get along with each other. So, if you can distill it down to that, and if you can link it to a universal theme, for example, betrayal, or how you depict a party in a case is, for example, is he like an outlaw wearing a suit? Everybody can relate to an outlaw dressed as a suit who might be a trickster, right? Is that person a trickster? There are ways to simplify the concepts and the type of people that you're dealing with that touch on myth and literature, fairy tales and themes that have been told orally for centuries before people could even write. And now using our ability to write and publish digitally and on paper, et cetera. And this is basically what you do. Another way is to find a really good metaphor. One of my favorite ones from an early trial was trying to point somebody out as being a fraud. What the metaphor that my client told me, who was Milton Berle's nephew, by the way, was he's trying to paint stripes on a horse and call it a zebra. Oh my gosh. Does that metaphor not just nail what's happening when somebody is misrepresenting the facts of the situation? So simple. Everybody knows what a horse is. Everybody knows what a zebra is. And painting stripes on a horse and calling it a zebra, everybody gets that, right? These are the kinds of themes that are universal that we want to explore and probe in our cases and then bring out and distill down to the most simplistic, basic, compelling language that we can possibly find. That's the challenge.
What is somatics and leadership?
Okay. Okay. This could be another hour-long podcast episode. But basically, what I'm interested in is helping people deal with their fear of being judged, their fear of being disliked, and their need to please others, and managing all the sensations that create stress for them when they are taking a position that may trigger those issues, right? Like we nobody wants to lose a case. It's humiliating, it feels terrible, it makes you want to quit. There's pain, there's shame, there's all these things that come with quote unquote losing a case, for example, or losing a deal, or losing a company, or being investigated by, I don't know, the FTC, for example. Nobody wants that. That's really uncomfortable because you're being scrutinized. Being scrutinized is uncomfortable. But if we're going to be leaders, we have to be aware that we're going to be scrutinized, and we have to develop a tough enough skin to forge ahead despite that scrutiny. Some people are masters at it. Some people are total sociopaths and narcissists, and it doesn't affect them at all. But most of us are not that far on the spectrum, right? They care what other people think. They care of making a mistake. They care of being wrong or things not going their way. So, how do we deal with the stress when we're out of control, where we're dealing with conflict? Conflict is so triggering. Being visible is so triggering. And this fear, this perfectionistic nature that high performers especially have, it can be paralyzing. So, somatics, the whole new body of research that's being done in the realm of somatic experiencing looks at the nervous system and how we're responding in our bodies to certain experiences, and teaches exercises that are so elegantly simple that anyone can do to sort of get a hold of themselves and regulate themselves so that when they're in a debate, for example, or in a courtroom, for example, if they stumble once or they fumble their words, they don't totally freak out and lose it and it goes south from there, right? We've all seen that happen and it's happened to us. It's happened to me. I have a skill set that I can draw upon so that when that's happening, I can live through it, number one, and two, sometimes turn it to my advantage.
Let me ask you, what is the importance of self-awareness and mindfulness in leadership?
The mindfulness piece is really important because for many reasons, but I want to touch upon an area that's a right brain function, and that is empathy. So, mindfulness begins with you, right? If we want to be mindful, it's primarily being mindful of ourselves. And I think we have to be mindful of ourselves in order to really have empathy for other people. And empathy is one of the hallmarks of an excellent leader. It's one of the several factors that go into having a high emotional IQ. And so empathy is really super important and it's a right brain function. Yeah. Did I answer your question? There's a
Yes.
lot of concepts that are involved in answering your question, so I may have strayed.
Let me turn to the art of influence. And that is, could you tell us what that is and how a listener might explore that with you going forward?
Absolutely. So, the art of influence is essentially many of the concepts that we discussed today, but well, I work with people and I teach them, and we go much deeper into what those ideas are. The art of influence is my program, actually. I mean, I call it the art of influence. It's where we cover some of these concepts. Like one thing that I didn't mention that I think is really important for your listeners to understand is how to be a charismatic and persuasive speaker. And one of the ways that you do that is by being able to give voice to the things that people are thinking, but they're not saying out loud, because that is the basis of all great art. That's why when we see a film or we read a book and we relate to it, we go, oh, wow, because they're enunciating, the artist, the writer is enunciating, or the filmmaker, or the actors are bringing to life universal experiences that we all feel and that we don't necessarily express. So, to be a charismatic leader, in addition to many other things, it helps to be able to speak that language. So we cover that in the art of influence. We cover how to be charismatic and magnetic, and we cover how to craft a persuasive message. And then we get into the discomfort that we feel around doing this job, whatever the job is, whether we are in charge of product safety for big pharma, whether we're raising money for a nonprofit, whether we are leading up to and reporting to the C-suite in a corporation, or whether we're lawyers and we have to give our clients bad news, or we have to take a very difficult position for a client whose morality we question before a court and a jury. So the same processes and the same skills are used in each of these and many more situations. So that's what we do in the art of influence. If you're asking me about my art of influence, which I
Yes.
assume you are. Okay, yes.
Jennifer, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode. But before we leave, I wanted to ask you if our listeners wanted to connect with you, find out more about your law practice or about your consulting practice on leadership, what might be the best place or places for them to go?
Okay, it's very super easy. I'm Jennifer B. Gardner on LinkedIn, and my website is .com.
Jennifer, this has just been a ton of fun. I have two metrics for a successful podcast. Number one, how much did I learn? Number two, how much fun did I have? And you scored
Oh.
11 on both.
Oh my
So
gosh, thank
I
you.
wanted to thank you, and I hope we can continue this conversation.
I hope so too, Tom. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to your listeners.